Hi, so today I'm with Zahir Khan. Hi, Zahir.
Hello, how are you?
Welcome. He's joining me from the UK. And this is an interview in a series of interviews called Seekers Finders about people's spiritual journeys. And really, mostly it's interviewing ordinary people, whatever that is, about their journey. But and Zahir is already a teacher. But when he contacted me, he sent me his first book, which was really about his spiritual journey, which started with a Sufi master and led him into non-dual teachings. So I thought, somehow it fitted into the series. So here we go. So here, why don't you start with just what got you going, what got you searching, and where that searching took you?
I'll apologize firstly then, because everything I'm going to say is going to sound like such a cliche, but yeah, unfortunately it is. I was 23 years old. I had my life mapped out. I was going to go to law school and become a lawyer. I was dating an incredibly beautiful woman. So my life was pretty planned out. I was living quite a superficial existence. I wasn't the guy that you talk about life in the universe. You tend to talk to me about things like parties and the latest designer labels and things like that. Over the course of 6 months, which is, I think I refer to as in 6 months, I went from hero to zero. In the book, I lost the woman of my dreams, or so I thought. My father passed away, and my life, which had been really well planned out, just fell into freefall. So one thing led to another, and God, I'm gonna have to give you the abbreviated version of this. So yes. Yeah, one thing. What?
We have an hour.
Yeah, we have an hour. So basically, around the time I met a Sufi teacher from the Qadri Sarwardi school. I spent 8 years following this man about, having no idea what he was saying or doing. He hardly ever spoke to me. I affectionately refer to him as a fake who was real. Which I just like saying, because that really does kind of mess up a few brain cells when people go, what you mean he was a fake who was real? And what happened was, I literally traveled. I talked to teachers from all different traditions. There was a series of events that you could call awakenings. And then 2008, I just stopped looking, sitting on a sofa at home. I realized that everybody was saying the same thing, regardless of which tradition they were coming from. And
okay, so that's going a bit, that's a bit too abbreviated, Zahir.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So what I'd like to know is, obviously your background is Pakistani Muslim, so it was kind of obvious that you started searching in that tradition.
No, it wasn't.
No,
it wasn't. I was my parents were very liberal, and growing up I was encouraged to sit with as many different faiths as humanly possible. I sat with people from all faiths, but not with the view to learn. It was just, my family were quite liberal, so I had never really been looking for anything. Life was pretty good. I knew nothing about things like Sufism or Rumi or anything like that. Like I said, my life was pretty superficial. It was like, I was expected to do, what every son of an immigrant would do, which was educate myself, get a good job, and do the right thing. So spirituality was pretty far removed from my life as far as I was concerned. Now looking back on it, I was surrounded by deeply spiritual people. However, at the time, none of it was registering. I'm from a working class family that just get on with life. I would love to say that when I was born, the Dalai Lama and a few other teachers turned up and heralded my birth, but no, it was a pretty ordinary existence. It was pretty much after my father died,
Mm-hmm.
that depression kicked in. I've just lost the woman of my dreams, and I needed answers. And even then, I wouldn't say I was seeking. I just felt I was broken somewhere, because I couldn't understand why the woman that I so loved rejected me. And I found out afterwards, because we were different religions, and that was a bit of a shock to me, because that wasn't something that I was brought up with, that there were these other religions or other people who didn't like you because of who you were. So, having grown up with, a Sikh auntie and a Hindu uncle and a Christian friend, to me, there was never really the Muslim thing there. There wasn't to me, I never really registered religion, and I didn't register spirituality because I didn't really need to. There wasn't really any need, which is why I think when everything started falling apart, I did what everybody does and assumed that something was broken, and went into the whole self-help, industry, and picked up all the books to, sort my mindset out in the next 21 days or something like that. It was pretty much a lot later on before this whole idea of enlightenment or something like that came along. And even that was through, I was practicing something called the Sedona method, and I was on a forum one night, and I came across.
That's pretty spiritual, Zahir.
I still didn't see it like that. At the time, like I said, it was a long line of methods I was trying, not realizing what I was trying. So I was pretty oblivious. I was like that man wandering around the supermarket, not realizing that I'm in the supermarket. So to me, the Sedona method was just a couple of questions that could be used to get rid of some feelings, because I was depressed. I just wanted rid of that. So yeah, that was
So how did you end up with a Sufi master then?
Right, you're gonna love this story then. In that case, I was sitting in a fast food restaurant on a Wednesday when my friend received a phone call, and he was told that this great teacher was coming. And again, I knew nothing about Sufism. And what he said to me was, look, a great flood is coming. Don't ask. I think he was trying to be all spiritual. And he said, would you like to come along? And I was like, well, yeah, why not? He'd been giving me books on Sufism because I was studying philosophy at university. It was one of the components of my degree. And he was fascinated. This friend of mine was fascinated by that. So he was giving me these books on Sufism by a teacher called Sheikh Nazim, who's an Naqshbandi teacher. I found the books, even then, I suppose, basic and elementary at best. And he was like, look, do you want to come with me to Slough? And the thing that swung it for me, there's a very famous Qawwali singer. Qawwali is like a musical form that's played in Indian subcontinent. Sufis use it as part of their whirling, and it's played in dargahs, which are like ashrams. And I like this artist. So I was like, I'll come along because he's there. And I then totally forgot about it. And on Sunday, I was literally just sitting around. I'd planned my day, and it included, as I say to people, a Simpsons double bill at 6 o'clock. And my friend turned up, and he was like, we're going to Slough. And I was like, oh, I've totally forgotten about that. So I got ready, and as I was leaving, my mother turned around to my friend and said, bring him back a Sufi. And that was really interesting. So I've got to Slough. Again, I know nothing about Sufism. I'm there for this artist. He didn't show up. He wasn't even booked for this gathering. I walked into a room, and there was this elderly gentleman with a beard. I've still no idea who this guy is, what he represents, even if it's spirituality or whatever. As we got out of the car, one of his students had come and said, tonight we will get you drunk. So obviously he was using Sufi terminology, to which I turned around to my friend and said, bro, what's he talking about? And he said, brother, this looks like it's a cult. Stick closely to me. Now, he was my friend who was meant to be well-versed in Sufism. And then they had a gathering. People were whirling, which I found interesting. I tried it. I didn't really think much of it. And then the next day, and this is how almost flippantly my journey started. The next day, somebody said, why don't you become a Murid, which basically means why don't you become a student? And this will sound, like I said, quite flippant, but I had nothing better to do. So I was like, well, why not? And that started this entire journey. I was then instructed for about 10 minutes where a student read out of a book the obligations of a student with a teacher, because we have something called Baya, which is a pledge of allegiance. And it was literally, you're going to do what the teacher tells you to, and he's your teacher and you're a student. And that was that. I recently went back to the school just to see some other teacher, because the original teacher passed away. And as I walked in, I said, we're taught in a way whereby we don't realize we're being taught. And he just smiled, he said, yes. And literally, welcome home. Our brothers come back. And I cleaned a lot of toilets, cleaned a lot of floors. I went to Pakistan for an Urs, which is a Sufi festival. I would love to tell you I knew what I was doing, which is why I suppose falling into the mystery is the way that it is, because within Sufism, there's a lot of emphasis on poetry and storytelling. And sometimes you can get your message across with a good story, as opposed to a concept, which can be very esoteric. I mean, I was doing a talk recently in Slovenia, and we talked about the impossibility of enlightenment, because we have created such a drama, and we've created such a play around this, that it's becoming almost impossible to wake up for people. I'm not saying that people don't wake up, but and so what I find is that I'd rather just talk to people, because I'm not smart enough to do the conceptual stuff. But what I find is there's probably a bit more power in conversation, because you're right, you go to see a teacher and the teacher's on the stage and he's now fully formed and he looks great. But what you really want to know is when he cried, when he was in trouble, how he felt, what his fears were, or what her fears were. And I still talk like that, because I think it's about dispelling the myths about this thing, because we go on about it's just this, or it's a natural way of being, or it's a natural state. And yet we then don't really deal with the emotional side of things. You know, I've had some incredible conversations. So I feel sometimes that when people are using this terminology, for a lot of teachers, it's valid. But I think what then happens is the followers or the attendees of the meeting listen to this and then start parrot fashioning. So I'd rather talk to somebody, because trying to parrot fashion me would just be a bit of a nightmare, really. So I'd rather tell a story, because was I scared during my journey? Yeah, totally. Was I confused? Yes. Did I cry? Yes. Did I laugh? Yes. Did I want to give up? Oh, millions of times. Was I a good student? No, I was a worse. I literally, the teacher would walk in through one door and I'd run out the other. Could I even say that I'd learned anything? Honestly, I don't know. But I'd rather just talk like this. And I think that's where falling into the mystery goes into depth about that, because ultimately I wasn't looking for realization. I didn't know what it was. The immediate problem was my pain. Sorry.
What were you looking for?
An end to my pain. An end to my pain. I was in pain. I couldn't understand why my life that was so perfectly structured just fell apart. And to me, that was my immediate concern, which is why when I talk to people, I always say to them, well, why are you actually here? And what you'll find is if a person is willing to be honest with you and talk to you, you may find that it's not enlightenment or awakening. It can be. I remember talking to a gentleman about a year ago, and we literally batted forward and backwards for 4 hours. I mean, it dragged on, and every manner of spiritual book was quoted to me, and all the terminology was used, and yeah, it was wonderful. And about 10 minutes near the end, he just literally turned around and goes, "It's my living situation." And I knew that was when the real conversation started. And we talked about his living situation. He was never seen at a meeting. He came to another meeting and said, "Thank you." But the reality is, I think a lot of the time, we're looking for, spiritual enlightenment. But if we're really honest, we're not. We have an issue. My issue was I was in pain. The woman of my dreams had left me. I would love to say that there was an inner calling to know God, but that would be a lie. It was just life was well. It broke down. When I wrote the book, I looked at the book a couple of months later and I thought, did I write this as a cathartic release? Was I writing this to try and make sense of it? What was really interesting was that I'd written other stuff. I'd written other books as well, but I would just delete them because there was really no words, but there was this story. And for some strange reason, the story made sense. And the feedback I tend to get from people is, oh, it's a really simple book. But that's what makes it profound. And it's just a story of a guy who was failing in his life. And really, he came across this thing called enlightenment. And that was really cool. And he thought enlightenment was going to be his cure. And that's what he thought for years, until he accepted that he was actually in pain. And he hadn't really dealt with the pain, because we can spiritually bypass. And I think a lot of people do spiritually bypass. And that's unfortunate. Yeah. Because they never get to the heart of it.
Zahir, when you look back though, I mean, at some point you say, yes, you were just looking for an end to the pain you were in. And, you know, I think that's probably true for most people, if not all people. But, you know, something got you kind of into this, even if you weren't aware of it. And, you know, what we're looking for kind of changes as we go along.
Yes.
Do you say that?
I'm glad you've asked that question.
Is that would, I mean, from your own journey, what is it once you became a student? You know, okay, so maybe you became a student and you didn't quite know even what all that was about. But at some point, you must have wanted something that was more specific than that, because, you know, you can't keep going haphazardly for a long time.
I always say that you should put a government health warning on any of these things.
Sorry, because, can you repeat that?
I always say that you should put a bit of a health warning on these meetings. And I always say to people, be very wary and be very careful of coming here. I'm glad you said that, because the pain that I was trying to alleviate then mutated. And what I mean by mutated was that it remained, but then something else joined it. And what joined it was that the need then to know what this thing was just overtook me. So what happened was I spent 8 years with this teacher, pretty much did everything he said without realizing that. And then there was a point where there was an awakening, and that was great. And I was enlightened now, so everything was wonderful. And then a couple of weeks later, it disappeared. So I was like, oh, damn, I've lost enlightenment. So I've been thrown out the garden. So I then started doing what everybody does in this case, of instead of just traveling, I started traveling backwards, hoping to recreate an experience. A year later, there was another awakening. So again, great, wonderful, this is brilliant. I'm back in the garden of enlightenment. And again, about 2 months later, it disappeared again. So I was getting a bit careless. I kept, you know, like losing this thing. But then after that second awakening, what I found was there was just something then took hold, which became very serious. And it wasn't about pain. As I said, the pain mutated. It was just, I needed to know, because I'd experienced, but I couldn't hold on to that experience. And then on top of that, I intellectually knew this. So, you know, I even remember talking to people.
When you say you had these experiences, you had these awakenings, what were they? I mean, just briefly.
Great question. Well, the first one, the way I'll answer that was that the first one was, I was sitting in a flat in Glasgow. And a couple of days before that, I'd been so desperate to try and figure this thing out that a friend of mine had suggested that I go to the top of a mountain and I stretch my arms out and say, life, I embrace you. I was so desperate to get rid of this pain or this, whatever this agitation was, I actually did that. So I walked about 15 miles. I was living in Glasgow at the time, went to the top of a hill and stretched my arms out because I was this desperate. And I said, life, I embrace you, and nothing happened. So I said it a few more times and nothing happened. So I felt quite stupid. And then as I was coming down the hill, I felt stupid and I felt embarrassed and I felt angry. And then I realized that I had a 15-mile walk back. But luckily I found a railway station in the Highlands and caught my train back to Glasgow. And I went to the local shop, got some food, had some food and went to sleep. And my general feeling was that if anybody talks to me about self-realization, I'm going to just kill them. I'm just going to get really violent and kill them. And then a couple of days later, I was like in my flat in Glasgow. It was a beautiful Sunday morning or something like that. And I was living by myself at the time, and I sat down on the sofa and I was looking at the ironing board, and also this feeling, sensation, because there's really no words at this point that's going to adequately describe it, just overtook me. And I remember hearing myself saying, "This is it." And then immediately I just felt very tired, but the world had changed somewhat. And I don't know how it changed, but I know it changed. And I remember just going to bed in the middle of the afternoon. And it was World Cup final day. And I believe Zinedine Zidane had headbutted some play. I think it was France versus Italy. And I was in some nondescript flat in Glasgow, and it just seemed to make sense to me. At that time, I was talking to a speaker called Tony Parsons, and we were engaged in these conversations. And, you know, he'd said to me midway through a conversation, one day you're going to ring me and tell me that you've experienced that which is indescribable. So I rang him up and I was like, you know, yeah, it's happened. And I was invited to come down to London to share my experiences. So I went down to a meeting, and it was my first ever non-duality meeting. So it was all rather brand new. I walked into this room, there was about 200-300 people. And everything was really amazing, and it was really all brand new, and everything was much more in sharper focus, and it was great. And midway through, I think I said a few words. And then there was a gentleman afterwards, and we were talking, and I said, "This is the most amazing thing in the world." And then he completed it for me, because he said the thing I wasn't quite ready to say, which is, and this is the biggest disappointment in the world as well, because there's ideas of what we think it's going to be, and then there's what it actually is. And I was sensing that an awakening. I know conceptually, and the standard line is that it's just a glimpse into something. But what I feel it's a glimpse into is what you actually are. But it's that sense of impossibility, that you can't believe that you've seen this. Because one of the things I found after Seeking ended was that I would be reading Rumi, or I would be, you know, something would come and I'd read it, and I couldn't believe that I was functioning in that same state. Very similar to the story of U.G. Krishnamurti meeting J. Krishnamurti at the meeting. And he's wondering why J. Krishnamurti is talking about him. And that's when he realizes, hold on, he's in the same state as well. So it's seeing who you actually are. But then, you know, because of our conditioning and our mind and our wanting to grab hold of this, we inevitably tend to lose it, because really that's a sense of impossibility. And that's we don't talk about that, because it's earth-shattering. And yet to me, this is as simple as breathing. It's to the point now where I don't really have words like I used to for it, because it's that ordinary. There really are no words. But yeah, I suppose that's what an awakening is.
Maybe share a little bit about, so you basically you'd already opened into non-dual teachings.
Yes,
at that point, obviously, if you were talking to Tony Parsons.
Yeah. Okay.
Was that a way of? Was that because you were disappointed with Sufism? Because somehow, you know.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that. The way I'd answer that is that everything in life comes full circle. Now, what's really interesting was the first teacher that I sat with. He'd said something to me that just stayed with me. He didn't really say much, so I suppose I paid attention when he did actually speak to me. He said, "Look at all of these other ways, and then we'll show you where we go." And I was like, okay. I mean, this is day one of meeting this guy, so I have no idea what he's talking about. And what I found was, naturally, I ended up going through all these different traditions, which is something I'd been doing as a child as well, because for the first 6 years of my life, I had two names. My name is Zahir Khan, but I also have another name. My name is also Pargansu, which was an elderly Sikh couple who had given me a Sikh surname, sorry, Sikh name. It's actually a very traditional name. So what I found was, I'd always been at that place where I was always looking at traditions, whether it was consciously or unconsciously. The funny thing is, going through the non-duality thing gave me an even greater appreciation of the Sufism thing, which has now given me an even greater appreciation of the non-duality thing, because I now realize that they're one and the same. So I still consider myself, you know, within the Sufi tradition, but at the same time, I also consider myself within non-dual teachings as well,
Mm-hmm.
because what I found, and I think this is where I think when I do talks, I tend to jump between traditions and religions and spiritual approaches, is that final moment where the idea of seeking died. What was really interesting, and I've never been able to actually explain this or say this fully, was towards the end of my seeking, I was sitting with Sufis and non-duality teachers and pundits and imams and priests. And what was really interesting was one day there was a thought. I'm sitting on a sofa and there was a thought, and it was a phrase. And I'd heard a Sufi say the same phrase as a non-dual teacher, like they literally said the phrase to the letter. But I'd also heard the Imam say that, but I'd also heard the Pundit say that. And that's when I realized it was all one and the same. So I feel these are like rivers that go into the ocean, I suppose. And I feel that what happens is, in the end, if there is an end, you know, we are Sufis, we are yogis, we are non-dual, we are all of it. And after a while, they're labels that we can pick up and put down as and how we need to, dependent upon the situation, dependent upon the moment. Because I do find that a lot of the methodology that I picked up from Sufism, I still use in talks. But I also find that I also use non-duality as well, because I think the thing is, you know, one size doesn't fit all. There are people who resonate with non-duality, and there are people who resonate with Sufism. Some people come along and they want to hear poetry and storytelling and what have you. But then I've also done talks where it's been very non-dual, and it's just a situation. So in that sense, I feel quite blessed, because I've always been doing this, you know, growing up, having a father who had no issues with me. I had a Sikh sister. I remember going to the mosque when I was young, and I had a Rakhi, and a Rakhi is something that a sister will put on your wrist and it's a festival that the Sikhs celebrate. And the Imam was scandalized. He was like, "What's that?" And I went, "It's a Rakhi." To which he was like, "Yeah, but we're Muslims, we don't do that." And I remember just answering, "But it's my sister." And I'm grateful that I had a father who allowed me to explore all that, because in a sense, I've always been doing this. I just wasn't aware. I did a retreat recently, and it just went silent. And what was beautiful was I'm sitting there silently, and I was drawn back to a time when I was a child, and my father was, he took me to this house, and there was all these elderly gentlemen sitting there, and they were just sitting there. And I must have been about 6, 7 years old, and I really wanted to play with the children I could hear outside. And I was just sitting there, and I remember as I was sitting there in this retreat, I could remember the smell of the aftershave of the elderly gentleman over there, the ring, the shape of his beard. And I kind of realized that there's nothing here that's new. I've always been doing this. But I was just, all realization is just becoming consciously aware. And we're not chasing realization, because that's our natural way. But some of us just want to have that conscious understanding, and life will give you that conscious understanding if that's what is actually needed. And I think what happened was, somewhere along the line, there was a conscious need for it. There was because I suppose these books had to happen, and these meetings had to happen, and an identity had to be put together based upon a story. But the funny thing is, the story's always been doing what the story's doing. And that's the beauty of life. It will always do what it does. I mean, you know, just before we were talking, we talk about how silent everything is, and yet there's words, and yet there's silence. I mean, there's words coming out of silence. And that's, you know, it's beautiful, because the idea of personal doership or ownership doesn't exist now. And that does make life easier. But at the same time, we're totally free to experience those emotions and mess up and make mistakes. And I think that's the bit that I like to concentrate on, and try and talk about spirituality as a practical reality. There was a Sufi called Hajweri who once stated, "A reality with no name is now a name with no reality." And as I say to people, if you get to watch teachers in India or Pakistan, you'll find that most of them are social workers. You know, I've been in the company of teachers, and you'll see most people walking in saying, "Well, my cow's not giving enough milk, my daughter's not getting married, and my business is failing, and my son's a layabout." These tend to be the standard kind of questions I've seen when I've been in these gatherings. And I think true spirituality should be able to talk conceptually and expansively, and yet also offer solutions for somebody saying, "Well, my cow's not giving enough milk. and my daughter's not getting married and she's getting on, or my business is failing. I think spirituality encompasses all of it, but then it's not spirituality, it's a reality with no name. And I recently, a couple of years ago,
wouldn't it just be about, isn't it just about really meeting people where they're at?
Yeah. That's what's so beautiful about it.
If they're concerned about their cow, that's what you talk to them about.
I love those conversations.
If they're wanting to be awake, then
talk you
talk about that, or maybe not. Maybe you tell them a story.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying earlier on. It all just depends on the moment. Sometimes I'll talk and sometimes I won't. I went to a city called Multan in Pakistan. It's known as a city of Sufis. It's titled as Madinatul Awliya. There's actually a sign as you come in. And I was bitterly disappointed because it has over 140 shrines. And I was expecting a holy man on every single corner. And what was really interesting, I didn't see a holy man on every corner. I just saw people getting on with their lives. What was really curious was I couldn't speak about any of this. I actually ended up at a village outside Multan where I actually spoke. And that's why I realized that their spirituality, like you said, it was so live that there wasn't even a need to speak of it. The most beautiful thing will be when there's no need for even these words. And then that's when your rickshaw driver can be telling you the most profound story, but it's just part of everyday existence, because you're thinking as you're going through these streets, you're thinking, I hope he doesn't crash while he's telling you about this ancient prophecy, which I absolutely love. When we can just have that satsang continuously happening, that's when it's fun. But it is always happening, isn't it?
Yeah. So let me take you back to your searching and losing it, because I think that's a lot of people's experience. That they have these moments of clarity, and however that heart opening, mind opening, however that presents itself, and then they lose it, or they feel they lose it.
Yes, they've lost it.
So there's this kind of this, I found it, I lost it, I found it, I lost it. That it's almost like a phase, that happens for a while. And often people get very desperate at that point.
Yes.
And because they've had such an opening, and they it's so powerful, and they think that's going to last, and when it doesn't, there tends to be a kind of a lot of self-blame and self-judgment, like what's wrong with me that I couldn't hold on to this, and what can I do to get it back? And it's like it, in a way, it kind of makes the seeking very desperate.
It's what I would term, I think that's when we have the danger of becoming advanced seekers and trying to find meaning where there is none. Because like you said, it gets desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. We also, as I said earlier on, we travel backwards. We try to recreate the experience, which basically means we're at loggerheads with what's happening now. Because rather than accept what's happening now, we just want to go back that way.
So what did you do when you lost it?
What did I do? Oh, well, I was one of those desperate people.
Okay.
After I'll tell you what. Right after the first one, it was lovely for a couple of weeks. I had an awakening. I was confused, so I just thought, well, okay, it's an awakening. I'd never had one before, so I thought, well, this is it. I started spouting all the non-dual go-to dialogues and stuff, and I got myself a job. Because what I told myself was that once an awakening, or once I had the solution to my problems that occurred, I would then go back and live my life, which was what the plan was. When it disappeared, I think the first time around I wasn't as agitated as I thought I would be. As a matter of fact, I took it quite in my stride. And the reason for that was I took a trip down to London, and there's a teacher called Roger Linden. He's, I think he's one of Tony Parsons' old people. And we'd arranged to meet up for coffee. And he gave me an explanation, which my mind was quite happy with, which was sometimes a mind comes back and your mind keeps coming back until it doesn't come back anymore. And I was quite satisfied with that. The beautiful thing as well for me at that point was life was taking over. I was in a relationship. This stuff can wreak havoc on your relationship. So the relationship started to go a bit wrong. So my energies were preoccupied in trying to save the relationship or trying to make that work. So after the first awakening, there wasn't this blame or anything like that. I didn't really look too deeply into it. I heard this explanation. It was good enough. And then life took over. I had a job to get on with. I had, a girlfriend that was going really, really wrong, that I had to sort out. And then there was around that time, and I talk about in the book, this whole chapter that I write about black magic as well, because again, I was one of those people who somehow manages to always pick the wrong girl and always manages to pick the one that's probably in the wrong religion as well. So there was a load about that, and that's when a Sufi sheikh appeared and helped me out. But that's kind of all documented in the book. That it wasn't so bad then. After the second one,
so
because
Zahir,
it lasted longer.
Can I
so,
just ask you, because I find that interesting, like here you are, you have an awakening, and somehow that comes to you in the non-dual kind of seems to be understood more along the non-dual lines. And then when you're in trouble, somehow you go back to a sheikh.
No, I don't go back to that sheikh. The way it happened was,
or sheikh comes into your life, but you're kind of back to the Sufi tradition. Was that just because he could help you?
I'm glad you said that. Basically, the way it worked was I'd heard of the Sufi sheikh. There was a very famous sheikh who came out of Dagestan called Sheikh Abdul Faiz Dagestani. He was quite an eminent Naqshbandi, which is a school of Sufism. He was quite an eminent Naqshbandi sheikh, and I think he met people like Idris Shah, William Bennett, a lot of the big figures in the 60s, 70s spirituality. This is what we're talking when Gurdjieff was around and people like that. One of his students I'd heard about for years, and I'd always wanted to meet him but never got a chance. What was interesting, there was an incident, and immediately, I think when we are spiritual, and I'll use the term loosely, sometimes we see certain synchronicities and things don't add up. And that's where, this is why, again, I don't feel that any one pointer is enough. It's got its limitations. And I think this is where non-duality brought in its limitations for me. There was an incident, and I thought, this is really interesting. This isn't happening. And I ended up meeting this Naqshbandi sheikh. What was really interesting was I walked in and I came up with all the non-dual stuff. So I'm sitting there and I went, I don't believe in the concept of teachers. I don't think there's anything to seek. It's just this. I said pretty much everything most of your viewers have heard. And he looked at me and he said something, and it just stuck with me. Because I suppose that's another way of seeing the same thing. And I remember just going, okay, and just dropped. I didn't know what to say to that. So the thing is this, I see that there's two ways. Now I've been opened up to another way of looking at this. And now I'm kind of going, hold on, there's another way of doing this. Which is why I then realized that non-duality wasn't the only fruit. So then there was a couple of months with him, and he came into my life as quickly as and he disappeared just as quickly. As a matter of fact, he just disappeared without even saying goodbye. But what it did is it rounded me, I feel. And this is the thing, what I found is that I will never turn around and say that one approach is better than the other. I believe that this reality is a multifaceted diamond, and we see it through different lenses. There's a story in the Sufi tradition of an elephant, and they go, men are blindfolded, taken into a room, and they all touch a different part of the elephant. Then they come out, and one goes, well, it was like this, and the other one goes, well, it was like this, and the other one goes, well, it's like this. And then they get taken into a room again, and realize that they'd be describing the same thing from a different angle. So it was, I think what happened was there'd been an awakening. The awakening had disappeared. I was back in the world of seeking. Desperation had kicked in. There was an incident I couldn't handle. And what was really interesting was that this man literally appeared, because I had to take a train to see him. He was in Manchester and I was in Glasgow. And I got on a train and the man was like, well, you're really lucky, the train's 10 minutes late. I got to Manchester, my connection was 10 minutes late. And then my next connection was 10 minutes late. So to me, that was pointing to some reality, because the reason I'm loath to be classed as non-dual or a Sufi is because the reality that these pointers point to is so much more expansive, and it's alive, it's living. And I think that's what we need to talk about, as opposed to, well, my way is better than your way. And that's what all my life I've been seeing. And as we were saying earlier on, I think it depends on the moment, because I don't know why the moment had me sitting in a room with this guy espousing non-dual theory, and he just turned us, well, I suppose that's another way of seeing the same thing. What was really interesting then was that years later, I noticed there's a concept called Wahdatul Wujud in Sufism and Wahdatul Shawd. And Sufism encompasses non-duality. It was made, so the non-duality exists in Sufism as one way of teaching. And that was made popular by a sheikh called Ibn Arabi, who was a forerunner to people like Rumi. And if we go then back to the Indian traditions as well, because this then made me look at Indian traditions, non-duality, if you trace it back, goes to Advaita. But there is also a philosophy called Advaita, which is why I think sometimes we miss the fact that people like Nisargadatta Maharaj or Ramana Maharishi, yes, they talked from a non-dual tradition, but there were also pious men who followed methodology as well. And that's something that I've realized can be easily reconciled, that there is method here and there is no method. And that's the beauty of this complete picture, that the methodology, once it's seen, what's beautiful about it is, yeah, there's no method here, and yet there is. There is a direct path there, and there's one that goes. So what I tend to say, if somebody walks into a meeting and they go, I don't know, it's all right now and right here, and right now, and they've been seeking for 20 years, then obviously there's a process going on. And sometimes you'll have people who've been seeking and doing methodology and chapter verse and vice versa. That's where you bring in here and now. But again, it's whatever comes up in the moment, because I would love to say that I know what I'm doing, but that would absolutely patently be a lie. It's not a reaction, but just whatever the moment brings. And that's why I'm so enjoying this, because even the questioning, it's all such a beautiful dance that's going on, really. And it's a dance of one, even though there are two that appear.
So I guess we could end here, but you know what's fascinating to me is really in what this interviewing series, the series of interviews is about, is really for them to be a resource for people who are somehow still searching, you know.
Yes, yeah.
And one of the questions that came to me to ask, apart from, you know, how have you been seeking and what have you found?
Yes.
Is and you started off with that. You said you started seeking because you were in pain. So there's two ways people can seek. One is they go for some kind of healing modality, whether it's psychotherapy or new age, you know, things, or they go for spirituality, or they do both. So because also, you know, there is often some emotional healing that's needed in their lives. So how would you say, looking back on your own journey, how would you say the emotional healing and the spiritual opening how have they touched each other, or, you know, what's been your experience with that?
My experience is that life takes care. And what I mean by that was at the time, this whole idea of something's wrong with me and I'm broken and I wasn't enough
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, she didn't love me, all occurred. And I was emotionally, you know, beaten down to a pulp and my confidence disappeared and depression happened. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to take drugs, but I tried some counseling and that didn't work. What was really interesting was that the cause of all of this, as I say, was the death of my father and a young lady. And what was really interesting is she appeared in my life a few years back. And it was an interesting conversation because Facebook being the way Facebook is, you know, you find someone, I got a message. And what was really interesting, because I think sometimes we change a lot, but we don't see it. She sent me a message and my reply changed her because I think she was expecting me to be really bitter, and I just said, "Look, life's really great. Thank you for everything." I did a talk at Mindful Man recently on the Isle of Man, and I always say that her wisdom was greater than mine because what happened with me was I had my heart broken, and instead of getting on with life and trusting that life would take care, I decided to do this journey. Whereas she got married, had children, and got on with life. And what was really interesting was everything came out. Everything came out as to why we'd split up, what had happened, the family pressures.
Mm-hmm.
What was really interesting as well was we conversed for a while, and I realized that as lovely as she was, it wasn't her. Like, you know, the reality of this wasn't the person, because it's amazing how people will just show who they are. And I remember reading something by Nisargadatta Maharaj, and it was something about, you know, after realization, things sometimes like issues that we've been holding just kind of fall away.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found is that a lot of issues have just fallen away. They don't have that emotional charge. And I
Mm-hmm.
could explain it as, you know, we realize it's illusory, but sometimes that doesn't really help somebody who's in pain.
Mm-hmm.
There is that cliched saying, time is a great healer. And I've found that to be true. But what I've also found is, I mean, I've had people turn up at talks and, you know, they've suffered a lot. You know, like there was these two beautiful sisters who turned up and their father passed away. Now he'd been their hero. And in that situation, I remember just talking to them. And I think sometimes if we can just sit with people, you know, and actually just not even share their pain, but just sit with people, because I think we've lost that ability to actually just connect with people, because I would rather talk to you, you know, over a phone or text you than actually sit with people. And it's something that, I mean, I did some talks in Bosnia and I learned so much about Bosnia. I'd had this real, like, stereotypical view of Bosnia. And I got there and there were people who just, they were into family values and they were into just sitting and speaking. And I think that's probably one of the most important things we can do, because I remember my father passed away and I went back to the family village. His final request was that he wanted to be buried back home. And there was an elderly couple. And what I noticed was every day the youngsters would come to the house. They'd not had children, but the youngsters would come to their house. They'd sit with them. And this kept them young at heart, so to speak. And I think we can heal when we sit and when we sit with each other. And but for that, I think we have to have honest conversations. We have to really identify why we're sitting in these rooms, because enlightenment, as I say in the book, when I first heard of it, to me it was the cure-all. To me it was everything. And the reality is, yes, it was, but at the same time, no, it wasn't as well. It was, as I said earlier, the greatest thing that ever happened to me, and yet it was the biggest disappointment as well, because it creates an honesty. It creates, you can't hide anymore. And I think that if we can convey that to people, that yes, you are going to go through dark nights of the soul on your journey. And yes, it's okay to mess up. Yes, it's okay not to sound right. Yes, it's okay to, you know, be afraid. And I mean, I sat in a room of Sufis who were resplendent, they were in the most beautiful of outfits. They whirled better than me. We had something called a shajra, which was a booklet with the family tree, which traced all the teachers back into the Indian subcontinent, right back to the source. We were given vazaif, which are spiritual practices. And as I confess openly, I never learned any of those. I was the worst student there. I didn't get it right. And sometimes when we're sitting in these meetings and we'll see somebody who just has such a handle on it, and that can create a real depression, and there's like, oh God, they're getting it and I'm not as well. So you do see this real hunger in the rooms where if somebody should have an awakening, we're all really happy, but secretly we're really burning as well. And I think this is where a certain openness and to talk about the things that really matter, like, yes, it is going to mess up, or even to help people identify why they're in that room. Because if somebody had identified with me that I was just, my heart was broken and I didn't understand why I was feeling these things, and I didn't understand how the story that I planned out had been destroyed. So was it pain for a relationship ending? Was it the pain of my story being exposed? I think I suppose I would have come to a resolution, quicker. There's something I've been saying a lot recently. The first teacher I sat with, I remember going to see him once, and he turned around to me and said, "Get a job." And I remember sitting there and I went, "Okay, I'll get a job." Now, I was suffering from depression at the time. My heart is broken and I don't understand what this guy is going on about. And 3 months later, get a job had mutated into, like, I'd sat with several other students and I said, "Oh, brother, the Sheikh talks in riddles. Okay, yeah, the Sheikh there's something very profound here." And it'd gone from get a job to, oh God, it means I've got to work for the school and we must spread this message across the universe and we must help people. And the teacher came back a year later and the first thing he asked me is, "Have you got a job?" And I went, "No." Now, I was 23 years old. I'm now 47 years old. And here I am learning those lessons now, that if I'm really honest, a lot of my suffering on this path, you know what I mean? And a lot of suffering for a lot of people in the rooms would be alleviated if we just did the things we're told. Because I now realize that if I'd had a job, I would have had a routine. Maybe the desire for realization may have died. Maybe this conversation wouldn't be happening. Or maybe what may have happened is that this realization, this event, experience, whatever you want to say, could have happened a lot quicker had I just listened. Because I feel that a lot of teachers are doing some great work and they're talking very honestly, openly, and literally. It's unfortunate that our mind is looking for meaning where there is no meaning. And like I said, desperate people do desperate things. And then we start looking for things that aren't there. It is, as they say in the non-dual tradition, it's simply this. But who's going to hear it simply this? So I think there's a lot of innocence and there's a lot of really good work being done by teachers, and each has their way of communicating, and it's completely perfect for the people that they resonate with and the people that they attract. There's that whole, your vibe attracts your tribe. And, I've found that most people I talk to are just like me. And I'm thinking, God, there's more of me. This isn't good. And, I use a lot of humor, a lot of storytelling, and sometimes I can get very profound. I mean, I did a retreat recently and I attempted singing, which I don't know what that was all about. And somehow it felt right. And I think we've got to all sit together in that honesty. The seeker as well, because the seeker brings the story and tells you something is wrong, but then sometimes doesn't want to examine whether that story is true or not. And we've got to get to that point where we can have these open conversations.
Most importantly, the seeker always has an idea of what they want.
Oh, the ideas are what kill us in the end, aren't they? Really?
And in the end, I mean, it just came to me that when I asked you about healing, and you said time is a great healer. Actually, the phrase that came to me is reality is a great healer.
Yes.
Because
we see reality over time sometimes. I think sometimes it's not where we just get older and possibly wiser. We take a few knocks and we realize, I was young, my life was mapped out, and that was the arrogance of my youth and the arrogance of not knowing, and a complete reliance on my mind. That my mind was I was going to run this course, but I was a victim of the conditioning. of society, of peer groups. I remember once tweeting, I'm a victim of my condition and yeah, I'm free of it as well, or something words to that effect. But the reality is a lot of us, we've been taught to do it this way. The educational system teaches us to find an answer outside ourselves. Our peer group teaches us to find an answer outside ourselves. I had the pleasure of doing the talk in Leeds recently. It was full of university students. So I've walked into this room and I was filled with hope, but at the same time I realized there's new sets of pressures on the youth now of today, of the perfect Instagram picture, of the perfect relationship, or having the great body and everything. And this is all conditioning where I know Krishnamurti spoke at length about it, but I think sometimes what we've got to do is literally dumb ourselves down. So it was something that you said at the beginning. Sometimes, you see that teacher and you know it's going to be a certain way. And I think sometimes we've got to also speak at the level that that the people are around us. If I've got somebody who's well versed in, I don't know, the Bhagavad Gita, I'm hardly going to start talking about, I don't know, Kim Kardashian. And yet one of the best meetings I ever did, I literally remember going on about Kim Kardashian. And what was really interesting was I had a philosopher, an astrologer with 40 years of experience, an ex-nun who spent time with the Dalai Lama, and a Reiki master. And then there was a 17-year-old girl wearing a pair of ripped jeans. And I remember just talking about Kim Kardashian. I don't even know why. And I think everybody was like, well, we're content to let him carry on because this is what he does. And midway through the meeting, she turned around and said, what's a Sufi? And I'd never even used the term. And I remember at the end of the meeting, the president of the Theosophical Society literally turned around and goes, you've been sitting there a year. Why didn't anybody ask you that question? So I think sometimes it's how we draw people out as well. Sometimes we do need humor. I've been asked to do meetings where, please talk about Sufism from a theoretical viewpoint. So let's talk about, Sharia, Tariqa, Hakika, Marfa. And you walk into the room and you kind of go, these people just want to laugh. Because that's the energetic expansion. The contraction, we can overload information. So we have to make people at home. I always say that if you look at the ashrams and you look at the dargahs, that have existed for thousands of years on the Indian subcontinent, it was literally travelers coming together. And what we did was we came together, we'd been traveling, and we needed a bed for the night, and we needed a meal, and we needed to sit with like-minded souls. Like you said earlier, sometimes we're in that situation where nobody understands that we've had this opening. We're like the freak of the family, or the freak of the community. And now, if what we're doing right now is exactly what happened in the dargah. It's exactly what happened in the ashram. It's exactly what happened in the monastery. Like-minded people coming together without judgment, without any sense of spiritual hierarchy as well, because I think we're at that time now where spiritual hierarchy doesn't really work. It may work for a certain personality on the Indian subcontinent, but we're sitting here in the West. And just literally conversing and talking like friends and having these beautiful exchanges. And okay, fine, if somebody cooks a meal, we have a meal together and we have these beautiful conversations. And then what happens is it's time for us to leave. So then we leave, but we say goodbye to each other, but we have this hope in our heart that we'll meet again. And to me, that's what these meetings are. We are literally just paralleling something that's been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. Doesn't matter how the format happens, whether it's a Zoom meeting, whether it's a live interaction or just bumping into someone. I think that's the beauty I've found. I feel life is very beautiful. I feel grateful for it. It's not without its challenges. I'm not going to turn around and tell your viewers that my life is so incredibly blissed out. It's not, but I found that it's just life. It's just all of a sudden there's an understanding, and we can say that it's happened to someone or not happened to someone, but I'm not smart enough for that. I would rather be, I used to jokingly say to people, I'm a fool, and God loves his fools and just takes care of them. Something has happened. I've been exploring it in meetings. I've been exploring it with friends. The thing I find is that the more I explore it, the more I find. And I think Socrates said it best when he said, I know nothing. So I really don't know anything. And yet, in knowing nothing, there's all these words and all these concepts and all these things. So that to me is the blessing of it all, that I really don't know. But that's created some sort of knowing, and people come along and, you know, they talk to me. To me, you know, that's the beautiful thing here, that we gather and we come together and we have fun. You know, I just loved the conversation at the beginning,
Zahir,
because I
we're
was like,
going
if
to
this has
have
been
to,
crazy.
I think we'll
Perfect.
have to end
Have we?
on this note,
Perfect.
you know, coming
Yeah,
together and having some fun. That sounds good.
that's it. Perfect. Thank you so much.
So thank
It's been
you.
wonderful.
And if you want to mention for people who
Mm.
feel drawn to you, how can they contact you?
I'm on social media, so I'm on Facebook. I've got a YouTube channel as well.
Mhm.
There is a website. The website, funny enough, is called fallingintothemystery.com.
Okay, perfect.
If you want, I can send you some links, and if you could, you know, like put them in the program or however you see fit. But yeah,
Well,
YouTube's
it's
a good
really
resource
just,
on
yeah,
social media.
I mean,
Yeah.
people can
However,
just Google
yes.
your name,
Yeah, they'll
right?
find me. They'll
Yeah,
find me.
good.
So yeah, and yes, the best one, Google my name. So there you go. So thank you.
So thank you, Zahir.
Thank you so much.
That was you know, it's interesting how every interview has a different color. So that was a
Yes.
Zahir color.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brilliant.